Today's landscape is based on Ni no Kuni, Wrath of the White Witch. The game features many breathtaking scenes that give off a real Studio Ghibli vibe. Let's get started. To begin, we start with line work to try and determine the general shapes and positions for all the major elements in the drawing. This helps ensure that we don't make any major perspective mistakes or run out of canvas after we've already done a lot of work. The sky is just a quick gradient using the dithering setting in A-Sprite. The clouds cover most of the sky in this landscape. I try to use a bigger brush to outline the edges of the clouds, mixing different shades into the clouds to try and indicate depth. To get a billowing kind of cloud effect, I start mixing the different shades into one another using the circular brush. I just keep mixing until I'm satisfied. As long as the bright parts are toward the light source and the shaded bits are away from the light source, it should be fine. Clouds are a lot of fun to draw since they're so undefined in nature. You can tackle clouds a lot of different ways and they still turn out well. I did end up adjusting the hue of the clouds so they contrasted with the mountains a bit more, but here is the final cloud layer. I start with the mountains by trying to figure out where the ridges will be. These are the biggest points of contrast on the mountains where the rocky faces go from being lit to shaded. You can see why I wanted to change the cloud color, as I'm having a hard time distinguishing the mountains from the clouds since they're using the same color. To get the mountain-like texture, I start making longer strokes that are aimed very roughly toward the base of the mountain. I put a few different values of our mountain colors in to make it look like we've got some smaller ridges and valleys on the mountain face. The idea here is not to follow any kind of structure. We want to make sure that it ends up looking natural. It's easy to get discouraged by focusing on the details of the mountains too much. Try not to judge your overall progress until you've completed all of your texturing and can look back at the mountains as a whole. I think this is probably good advice as a whole for pixel art. We follow sort of the same process on the shaded parts of the mountains, but we use the darker colors from our mountain color ramp. Sometimes I wonder if it would be easier to do these kinds of strokes if I had a tablet rather than a mouse and keyboard. I think the curves would flow a little easier, but I'm really comfortable with the mouse and keyboard, so I'm not sure what new problems I'd introduce by switching it up. It would definitely be fun to try out though. Maybe a mix of both is optimal. I really like how the color pop from the green adds to the mountains. I follow the structure laid out with the gray tones until I have a decent coverage, but not completely covering the mountains. Here are the mountains and the sky by themselves. The forest was tricky. The detail in the reference forest was difficult to transfer to the scale of these pixels. In the end, I used a circular brush to indicate the tree shapes and tried to indicate shadows between the trees as much as I could. I made multiple passes over the trees with the highlights and the shadows until I got them to a point where they approximated a dense forest. In the end, the forest isn't a focal point of the landscape, so it ends up being okay that it's unremarkable. If I put too much detail into it, the forest might end up looking too busy or distracting. The rock formations from the reference are really striking, and one of the things that first caught my eye, they have kind of a layered effect with some gravity-defying features that are really cool. I try to indicate the layers by making a lot of horizontal strokes on the big rock. The smaller rocks are more traditionally oriented. I always enjoy creating rocks since there's so many variations in nature, so it's hard to mess them up. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but rocks are fun to draw. The waterfalls from the higher parts of this formation are so cool. The castle is made out of some cone and cylinder shapes. I really like the idea of this castle nestled in the forest at the base of this mountain. You get to go there in the game, and it's definitely a cozy place. Here is the canvas so far. This pretty much completes the background minus the lake. The foreground is a big scale shift in this landscape. It gives a nice impression that we're standing high above the forest and lake below. Since we're so much closer to these rocks, we can add more details like the mossy bits and smaller cracks. I really like how each of these rocks in the foreground are different shapes and types of rocks that you'd find in nature. It really gives a dynamic feel to this foreground, even though it's just rocks and grass. For the bushes, I did the typical circular brush blending of different shades of the foliage, greens, and the palette, but then I ran over it with a spray brush to help add some noise to the bushes. This helped the texture of the bushes appear a bit more natural for something so close to our point of view. I had trouble getting the darker hues to work out for the foreground bushes, so I decided to add some additional rocks to this area. Sometimes an area in my head or something from the reference photo just doesn't end up turning out the way I intended when I try to recapture it through pixel art. Rather than frustrating myself, I just try to reimagine what that portion of the canvas would be if I went in another direction. This portion of the foreground is where the main characters stand in the reference painting. Since we're omitting the Ni no Kuni characters, you can imagine that you're the one standing there overlooking this scene. I'm trying to make some sun-drenched portions of this platform along with some shaded parts near the edges. I blend the parts together, trying to make sure my strokes are looking kind of grass-like. I'm also adding some darker bits to indicate some of the parts of the platform are receiving cast shadows from the rocks, bushes, or even the longer blades of grass. I almost forgot the last little rock to fill out this foreground. Looking back, I wish I would have chosen a more saturated ramp of green for the foreground to make it pop a bit more. I do end up adjusting the colors right near the completion of my work. The last bit is the lake near the foot of the castle. There's also a rocky plain at the edge of the forest that has some interesting rock formations. I start by blocking out the areas with solid colors. This little structure has some cylindrical pillars that hold up a mini plateau. This little structure has some cylindrical pillars that hold up a mini plateau. For the lake reflections, I create a new layer that has lowered opacity and then copy, vertically flip, and paste the scenery bits just on the opposite side of the lake. Since I have multiple layers of scenery I have to copy, it's a few steps for me here. And that does it for this particular gamescape. I really enjoyed creating this scene from Ni no Kuni, Wrath of the White Witch. It's a super cozy game, and I got to feel some of those same feelings while creating this. I hope you enjoyed it as well, and I will see you all next time. Until then, good night.